Tonight on Brian Ross Investigates, Americans still held hostage. Where is journalist Austin Tice, last seen alive in Syria? Where is former FBI agent Robert Levinson, last seen alive in Iran?
And please help me get home.
Now the mother of journalist James Foley, beheaded by ISIS 5 years ago this summer, speaks out, asking whether the U.S. government is doing enough to help bring back its kidnapped citizens.
The conditions here along the border are getting worse.
An American shame. Immigrant children held in deplorable conditions. No soap, no toothbrushes.
You know, if you don't have a toothbrush, if you don't have soap, if you don't have a blanket, it's not safe and sanitary. Well, wouldn't everybody agree to that?
One doctor calls it a place of torture, while for-profit prison companies make big money. Author John Carlos Frey on America's stealth war at the border and who's getting rich because of it. Plus, our shout-out. It wasn't until a reporter from New York showed up to tell their story that a federal judge became aware of the racial disparity at 2 Louisiana high schools.
If you're a teacher and you don't know what you're doing, how you expect me to do?
Now, top school officials have lost their jobs, and change is on its way. From the Law and Crime Network studios in New York City's Herald Square, this is Brian Ross Investigates. Good evening and welcome. Tonight, Americans taken hostage, many still missing. It was 5 years ago this summer that ISIS began to execute a series of young Americans who had been taken hostage, journalists and aid workers who had gone to Syria. Their plight revealed the frustration and anger of the American hostage families who accused the FBI and the White House under the Obama administration of not doing enough to help, and in fact, often blocking efforts the families were making to get their loved ones freedom. The first of the Americans to be executed by ISIS was photojournalist James Foley, and since then his parents have been outspoken in their criticism of how they were treated by the U.S. government. This week, Foley's parents, who have created the James Foley Legacy Foundation, are out with a new report on U.S. hostage policy, and we're joined tonight by Diane Foley to talk about all this. Diane, thank you so much for joining us. You went through such frustration from the government. Is it any better now?
Yes, we're very happy to report that things are better for Americans who are considered hostages. That is, Americans who are held by terrorists, criminal gangs, or pirates, if you will. We also found out that Americans who are unlawfully detained by foreign governments, on the other hand, are sorely in need of similar help, similar interagency effort to bring them home. That would mean people like Robert Levinson, like in Saudi Arabia, there's a Dr. Walid Fatai, Venezuela, Tomei Badel, in Iran, Princeton graduate student Wang. So there are hundreds of unlawfully detained Americans by foreign governments who are in need of a similar interagency effort and support by the highest levels of government.
And Diane, as you know and as you said, a number of Americans taken hostage over the last few years remain among the missing. Journalist Austin Tice taken in Syria, and as you said, former FBI agent Robert Levinson, last seen in Iran, who issued this chilling plea to the U.S. government on video.
And please help me get home. 33 years of service to the United States deserves something.
Diane Foley, just how many Americans are there who remain hostages overseas?
You know, the actual numbers are classified, and we are trying to get more accurate numbers, but we definitely estimate hundreds of Americans are taken hostage and or unlawfully detained every year abroad.
You say hundreds of them, really?
Hundreds, Brian. Many are not reported because often they feel the best way to get people home is to keep the case very quiet. But at times that benefits captors and doesn't get the attention of the highest levels of our government.
And Diane, on that point, a question for you from our control room from executive producer Rhonda Schwartz. Rhonda?
Diane, hostage families are often told to keep quiet, not to tell the public, not to tell anyone what's going on. What's your thoughts on that, having been through all this?
Every situation is very unique, and it really depends on the family, because it is true that a lot of media coverage can increase the value of hostage. So one has to take that into account. It also can help find the person and find people who might be able to help them come home. So it's a very personal choice, and often depends on the strategy of how they are going to be brought home.
Diane, are you left feeling that if the government had done more, your son could have been brought home?
Oh, definitely, Brian. I feel that we did not engage as a government because of the civil war in Syria, and therefore we missed out on a lot of intelligence about ISIS that we would have known had we engaged with the captors of the 4 Americans. So I do feel it could have turned out differently if our government had negotiated with them.
The stated U.S. policy is that Americans don't pay ransom to get hostages released from terrorists. That was the case. They told you, in fact, they actually threatened you with prosecution if you tried to raise the money on your own. Is that policy, you think, correct?
Well, there's no actual research that shows that not paying ransom brings people home. It's actually the opposite. Americans and the British, because of that policy, have worse outcomes. However, I feel there's many ways to negotiate. Ransom's only one. There are sanctions. There are other things that captors want. I think the key issue is the need to engage with captors when our citizens are at risk.
And finally, let me ask you, how do you rate, what grade do you give to the Trump administration on this issue?
I have to commend the Trump administration. The Trump administration has made the return of Americans more of a priority, without a doubt. And as a matter of fact, I'm hoping as Secretary Pompeo and the president go to the G20, they will remember these innocent Americans, such as Dr. Walid Fatai, Princeton graduate student Wang, the Venezuelan executives who are held hostage there, as well as in Syria, Maj Kamal Maz. That's just the tip of the iceberg. There are so many other Americans in need of U.S. leadership and advocacy.
Diane Foley, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Next, the American shame, the treatment of immigrant children at the border. One doctor called it a torture center. When we return. We're back now with a hard look at what is an American disgrace, the treatment of immigrant children at the border. This week, officials moved hundreds of children out of one of the worst detention facilities after reports of deplorable conditions. At a contentious court hearing, judges took a government lawyer to task for the conditions there.
It's within everybody's common understanding that, if you don't have a toothbrush, if you don't have soap, if you don't have a blanket, it's not safe and sanitary. Well, wouldn't everybody agree to that? Do you agree to that?
Well, I think there's fair reason to find that those things may be part of safe and sanitary.
Maybe, are a part. What do you say, maybe?
We're joined tonight by one of the few reporters who's been on the front line since the beginning, John Carlos Frey. John, thanks for joining us. Your new book on the subject, Sand and Blood, is just out. What do you make of what's going on with the children at the border?
I have report after report after report of children being mistreated by Customs and Border Protection over the past couple of decades. You and I have even reported together about things that happen on the border. I'm actually glad that this is coming to the forefront, but this is actually U.S. policy. We're supposed to make this journey and incarceration about as bad as you can possibly imagine. This is part of what Donald Trump is basically using legally.
In other words, to make it, to discourage families from making the move towards the U.S. Is that the idea? Make it so painful?
Yes, the policy is known as a deterrence policy. We're never going to be able to keep everybody from coming. We're never going to be able to seal off the border and keep migrants from coming. So let's shake them up a little bit. Let's make them cross the deserts or the mountains. If we catch them and we incarcerate them, let's not give them a cushy bed. Let's not give them good food. Let's not even let them sleep. Let's leave the lights on. No toothpaste, no toothbrush, no mattresses. The way the children are being treated is part of U.S. government policy.
I think this has all come to a head this week with some of those moving pictures of children. The young father who died along with his daughter drowned trying to cross the Rio Grande. Do you see opportunity for change here now because of a national outrage?
It seems like that's the only thing that ever moves the needle. If the citizenry is aware of what's going on, this is policy that has gone on under a cloak of secrecy for a long time. So I'm hopeful that the fact that this now is in the light and people are seeing exactly what happens, that maybe at least the administration may do something.
Your new book deals with the people who are actually making money from all this. How can that be?
Well, you know, we just saw an appropriations bill that the House passed, and it looks like the Senate passed as well for $4+ billion for aid. Who's going to implement that aid? Those are defense contractors. That's $4 billion for the most part put into private enterprises' hands to feed the children, to provide sanitary conditions. This is all a system of private contractors that basically manage the border and manage the way people are detained. We detain about 50,000 people in detention facilities, and 75% of those detention facilities are privately run and privately managed.
So their discomfort means big money for someone.
It's estimated that when we started to see children at the border at the beginning of last year, that defense contractors swooped in and made about $1 billion instituting these places where they're being held. $1 billion to hold children.
John, some of your reporting that's been on this program has to deal with the fact that that area of Central America from which many of the people are coming is suffering from a famine with conditions that are really responsible, that are drying up the land, sort of climate change. We're seeing some of the early results.
The World Food Program, which is a subsidiary of the United Nations, in February this year has declared 2.1 million people as being food insecure. That is the step before all-out famine. And that's, as you say, is a direct result of people losing their crops. The region is drying out due to climate change. There's 5 drought now. It's to let up. So 2.1 million people who can't feed themselves, we're starting to see them at the border.
And you think that's driving them towards the U.S., the fact that they can't feed themselves, they don't have jobs?
Well, this is one of the sending factors. Migration is complicated. If you can't feed your family, if you can't find a job, if you're afraid for your life because of the violence, all of those things piled on may make someone make the decision to move northward, and that's what we're seeing. I was in the caravans at the end of last year that were heading to the U.S.-Mexico border, and many of the people that I spoke to were farmers who could no longer farm the land because the rains just weren't coming. And I talked to several people who were living on 1 tortilla a day. That's about as much as they could muster.
President Trump has repeatedly said this is the responsibility and the fault, frankly, of the Obama administration. Is there anything to that?
I don't even understand what that statement means. He's been president for 2 years. The executive branch is responsible for implementing immigration policy. I think Obama's been out of office for a while, so either he's not taking responsibility or trying to find blame, but it's his job now. If Obama screwed things up, that was a couple of years ago. It's his job now. His administration is responsible for what we're seeing.
Help our viewers understand the whole issue of asylum. U.S. grants asylum. We're being flooded with people seeking asylum.
We have laws on the books that actually allow people to come to the border and say, I am being persecuted. I'm a victim of violence. I am afraid for my life. I'd like to come and seek refuge in the United States. We let them in. and we allow them to go through a court process. It's the courts who decide whether or not their claims are legitimate. And if the court decides that they're not, they will be deported. 90% of the cases are usually not found to be credible. So most of the people are returned, but they are given the opportunity to make their claim. So the fact that the president is keeping people from making a claim of asylum is basically in violation of our own laws. The picture that we're all seeing, this horrible picture of the man with his child drowned in the Rio Grande, is said by his wife to have tried to make a claim of asylum, but he was denied, so he tried to swim the river. So I think that there is blood on the hands of the administration by not allowing these individuals to make the legal claims, and in some cases, that's why they're coming to the border.
Blood on their hands? You really mean that?
Yeah, I really do. You know, I mean, if we're not giving children and families the opportunity to make a claim of asylum, which we by law are supposed to, and people are dying as a result, who's responsible? If migrants are dying by the thousands in the deserts due to our policies, are we not responsible? The only individuals or the only group who can alleviate the suffering is the federal government. And if they're not doing that, I think that we have to take a look at the fact that our policies are causing great harm. Yeah, I'm not really being hyperbolic here. And as a journalist, I'm very careful about the words that I choose. But I'm not sure that people would be dying in mass as they are or being treated in such inhumane conditions if it wasn't for the way we're implementing policy.
John Carlos Frey, thank you so much for joining us as always.
Thank you, Brian.
Up next, our shout out to the reporter who got the attention of a federal judge to deal with the racial disparity between two high schools in the same county in Louisiana when we return. Our shout out tonight is an update on the great work done by a New York reporter who helped give voice to some high school students in Louisiana who wanted to know why the predominantly white high school in the same county had so much better facilities than at their school. It got the attention of the federal judge overseeing the district, who had no idea what was going on until he saw the report.
The mold, the carpet, the walls itself, the classrooms, the teachers, everything that you need in the school or could use in the school is not there.
Reporter Dan Lieberman with the online media outlet Now This went to Catahoula Parish in Louisiana to Block High School, where most of the students are African American.
To see why students are speaking out and what conditions in Deep South schools are like more than 6 decades after desegregation.
We saw a local news piece from rural Louisiana about these kids who were protesting conditions at their high school.
We got teachers that are not certified teaching subjects that they don't even know.
If you're a teacher and you don't know what you're doing, how you expect me to do?
I talked with Lieberman at the Now This studios in New York. Were the kids afraid to speak out? Were they afraid they might be punished by the school?
They were surprised to see that someone from out of town, out of state, was showing up to really put a spotlight on these issues. They weren't sure it was going to make much of a difference because they really felt like in this parish, in this state, their voices didn't matter and they weren't going to get a change.
What made the story so powerful is what Lieberman then discovered nearby.
But 13 miles away, there's another school in the same school district that looks a lot different. Nearly 90% of the senior class here is white. They perform better academically and enroll in college at a higher rate.
It really did feel wrong. It felt like an injustice. This is one school district. The schools should not look that different. And there's been desegregation orders in place since the 1960s. And for, if you're in 11th and 12th grade, at one school, majority white, other school, majority black. You look at the conditions of the two high schools and you see that the funding doesn't add up.
So we just tried to film inside Harrisonburg High School, but the superintendent won't let our cameras inside. They don't want the principals to talk to us on camera. But there's a clear, notable difference in how the school looks compared to Block High School.
But Lieberman was able to get the superintendent on camera.
When we talk to students and we talk to families at Block High School, they compare it to Harrisonburg. They say Harrisonburg has beautiful facilities. Why do you think they're saying there's such a difference?
Several of the other schools, communities have passed bond issues specifically around facility renovation and refurbishment, and in the recent years, Jonesville hasn't passed any such issue to address their schools.
Both high schools are in the same district, and Lieberman says he thinks there's more to it than bond issues after talking to one school board member.
So I asked the school board member, why don't you just consolidate the schools? And she said, the parents at that school, they don't want their kids going to school with those kids because of their moral character.
That's what she said?
Yeah.
Which was what, a code for?
It's a code for racism. It was so obvious. You feel it there, and it was wrong.
Lieberman's report had immediate impact. Federal Judge D. Drell, overseeing the long-delayed desegregation efforts in that school district, saw the Now This report and ordered a hearing into what's going on. So essentially, he was unaware of this disparity until your report.
That's right.
So he gave you full credit for bringing this to his attention.
Yeah.
Neither the school board nor the Justice Department had done that.
He said that I'm so glad you came down to Louisiana.
Why do you think it took an outsider to go down there and to reveal this?
To me, I really think that it speaks to the broader crisis in journalism, where areas like this, in the Deep South, in rural areas, they're not getting asked tough questions. Reporters are not showing up there asking tough questions.
Since that original report, Dan Lieberman tells us the high school principal and the superintendent are both out of jobs. One resigned, the other retired. And now the federal judge overseeing the long-delayed desegregation efforts has ordered school officials to report back to him every other month about what's being done to correct this glaring black-white discrepancy. Good work, Dan. Well, that's our program for tonight. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you back here next week. Good night.
Daniel Villegas, not guilty of...
I'm Aaron Keller. Join me for the Daily Debrief. It's your chance to catch the hottest moments of the biggest cases we cover here on the Law and Crime Network, plus the day's top legal stories coast to coast.
I didn't really think at that moment I was going to pull that trigger.
If you missed anything during our live trial coverage, we bring it to you again on the Daily Debrief. It's your chance to get caught up in your favorite cases, Monday through Friday, live from 5 to 5:30, right here on Law and Crime.
Tonight on the Daily Debrief.